Hi, everybody. It's Susan again, and I'm here to talk about the Gemini New Moon, just as you hear sirens blaring outside my window. There you get a little taste of the goofy Brussels ambulance. That's when the fire department sends an ambulance out. They have a different siren. I hope you can hear that because it's kind of funny. Anyway, I thought that was pretty Gemini. So Gemini, of course, is all about the local neighborhood, everything going on around you, busyness, moving to and fro, being in a rush. Uh, so this is, I thought, I'll just let it hang because otherwise I would try to filter that out. But after all that, now I hope you did pick up on that sound. For once, maybe my mic is actually working and you didn't. But just I wanted to come in here and share a few thoughts on the Gemini new moon. I'm not going to do a detailed sign by sign analysis. I'll just give you the background. And I think what I'll do instead of the sign by sign thing is leave you with this and these thoughts that I'm having at the moment. And in the description below the video, which many of you don't seem to be aware exists, click on that and I will list then sign by sign what is happening in which house. So just to give you a sense of what I feel is a much more important idea around this Gemini new moon. So I'm going to take some of the notes that I used to make my blog. So I posted a blog yesterday for the first time in something like 2 months. I've been running around myself trying to find an apartment for the last 3 months, which is in itself a kind of a part-time job. And it has me really behind in a lot of my work, just basically doing the things that I have to do and trying to catch up with the rest. My accountant is on the verge of firing me, so I have to also do my accounts later today and let him have all of that. So let's talk astrology here for a minute. This is the chart for the Gemini new moon. So a new moon is always when the sun comes up to join the moon, or rather the opposite, it's the moon coming up to join the sun. In this case, the new moon is in the sign of Gemini and it's late Gemini. So this was earlier today. I'm bringing this to you on the 18th of June, but probably 5 hours later, maybe even 6 hours later. And so it's now the moon will have already moved into Cancer by the time you see this. But nonetheless, this is starting the new lunar cycle. And so it's valid for the next 28 days or so. And the ruler of this new moon, Mercury, is there at the same time in the same house, which is always empowering. It gives an extra dose of the meaning of the new moon and the sort of archetypal sense of what Gemini represents, which of course it is all about communication. It's, as I said earlier, it's about the neighborhood. It's about what's going on around you, the busyness, the running around, communications of all kinds. And the actual lunar cycle at the new moon is about starting stuff over or starting something anew, beginning something fresh in this area of life. This is especially strong for anyone who has 23 to 29 degrees of mutable signs. And because the moon is quite close to the end, it's almost at the 27th degree, we could extend that to 0 degrees of Cancer, and then, of course, 0 degrees of the cardinal sign. So the mutable signs, just to remind you, that's Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces, and Virgo. And then the cardinal signs are Cancer, Capricorn, and Aries and Libra. So if you've got 0 degrees of cardinal, maybe 1 degree, this will also probably affect you. It's certainly worth paying attention if you have an important placement there, not the outer planets and things like that. It doesn't really affect us directly, personally, for such a fleeting event as a new moon. And so these exchanges and interactions that we have in the symbol of Gemini rule our everyday life. Like this is the stuff of life, what Gemini represents. It's the relationship that we have with people around us. We don't even have to be related, although it also represents brothers and sisters, so siblings, and also cousins. And then the people that we meet every day, the bus driver, the person we buy our groceries from, the neighbors that we come across, and so on. And so this idea of exchange comes into every aspect of life. It means exchanging ideas, exchanging money, exchanging belongings, because Gemini also is a very commercial sign. So this is ruled by Mercury. The merchant or merchandise comes from the word Mercury. And so all these kinds of exchanges are very Gemini, very third house as well. So if you have a strong third house, or if you see planets in the third house, that quality is also there, because the third house carries a lot of these meanings, largely because of the natural zodiac. And it's not an equal representation. The house has also extra meanings compared to just the sign. And what I wanted to look at today, particularly, was the notion of communication. And well, we often, on a surface level, think of communication as how we speak or how we express ourselves. It's a kind of a selfish way of looking at communication. It's how we share our message. And this, especially in the modern times and especially in the social media era, is what I think most people are thinking about in terms of communication. It's more like being talking at somebody, if not yelling, all caps. And so communication to be effective requires listening as well. That's absolutely 100% a part of Gemini, and this part is often ignored or forgotten. And it's not listening, in the sense of, yeah, I heard the words come out of your mouth while I was reflecting on what I wanted to say, but it's really listening. What my teacher used to call deep listening. Thich Nhat Hanh called it deep listening, meaning listening with the intention of understanding. And understanding is also a Gemini word. What can I learn through this communication? So the exchange of ideas on the, let's call it, least sort of developed level, or the most superficial level, which Gemini can absolutely represent, sorry, is it's gossip and just exchanging words and not really getting into any depth of exchange. It's not really trying to understand something, but on a higher level of communication, on a level of communication that serves our learning, which Gemini also represents. How do I learn from you? We do need to absorb what the other person is saying, and we need to be open to receiving that new idea. So we can't have a preconceived idea. If we are only listening to hear a resonance with what the other person is saying, we miss an important opportunity to learn. This happens increasingly. We have these silos of information and bubbles of safety zones where people don't feel threatened by other people's opinions. When I was growing up, the idea of being sensitive to another person's opinion it just didn't even cross anybody's mind. It's just such an outrageous idea that you could be harmed by somebody having a different opinion to you. It is that level of fragility just didn't exist until really the social media era. What we could call, I think, the initial outgrowth of that was probably in the time of, I'm going to say, Sagittarius, where Pluto was in Sagittarius, and political correctness started to grow and grow and grow. And as a result of that, as an outpouring of that, people started to become really careful about how they shared their beliefs, Sagittarius, and their opinions, Sagittarius. And Sagittarius is a belief and a strong opinion, whereas Gemini just has ideas about things. It's the more kind of coming and going around it. It's less fixed because that mercurial energy is not so fixed. But that fragility, I think, started back then. I'm just looking back in terms of what my understanding is. It may be wrong. And if you have other ideas in terms of the astrology, I'd be fascinated to hear. But we're looking at a time where people are extremely fragile around communication. And on the one hand, that doesn't need to be like that. And on the other hand, it makes a lot of sense, because one of these things that we have to understand in terms of the dual nature of Gemini is that it's not founded in reality, or what you could call the absolute reality or capital T truth of life. It is the relative reality. And where Sagittarius represents maybe a higher level of truth, the capital T truth, where Pisces is ultimately that. It's understanding the oneness and our interconnectivity. Sagittarius, understanding the higher wisdom behind how we all fit together. And Gemini sees the duality. This is why also choosing is difficult for Geminis. There's so many options, so many things that appear different. Equally, we to each other appear different, but that's not the truth of life. And so it feels like we can say anything, and that we can also be hurt by the words that another person says, or that we can hurt another person with our words and not be affected by that. So, on that level of truth, we absolutely can be affected by each other's words. Um, and anything that harms another harms ourselves. This is the thing that Gemini doesn't really get. And it's not to say a person who is a Gemini, XYZ, ascendant, sun or moon or whatever, can't grasp these things. I'm talking about the archetype of Gemini when I talk about these things. So the archetype of Gemini is about this rapid fire exchange. It's not about the deep understanding. And therefore, you can get a lot of back and forth, and you can get a lot of thoughts and opinions that are just kind of off the cuff, but not necessarily based in any kind of timeless reality. They're time bound, they're circumstantial. Um, and astrologically, belief is the domain of Sagittarius. What do I believe? As opposed to Gemini, what do I think? Two very different things. And so, where Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, the wise, benevolent energy of the teacher, or the one who knows. But the dark side of Sagittarius is dogmatism, and the relief of this, if we want to find the polarity, to find the relief of whatever it is that's coming up in terms of conflict or tension or confusion around what we're experiencing. And the relief to dogmatism, which is very powerful these days, is to seek to understand in terms of exchanging, in terms of changing and thinking differently, being open to new ideas. This is the higher quality of Gemini, this openness and receptivity to ideas, as opposed to that I know already, don't tell me, that kind of know-it-all attitude that Sagittarius energy can carry. Yeah, when we know it all, when we think we know it all, we shut down the opportunity to question our ideas and our opinions. And so this is the opposite of learning, really. It's I think I know it all, therefore I stop learning. And Gemini says, no, never stop learning. Mercury is all about youth. It's youthful curiosity, youthful ideas, youthful attitudes of what's next. And this can be extremely helpful when we feel stuck. So what's next? What can I learn from this situation? So communication isn't possible if we don't have this open-minded exchange, the listening as well as the talking, this is only my opinion. What's your opinion? Let me hold your opinion as equally valuable as mine, knowing that both of them are coming from the place of duality and not from a place of truth. The truth being that the mind is always in flux, and there is the foundation of that, which is the awareness of all of that change and that the changing ideas. And if we just talk without listening, we're just bullying. Talking without listening is actually very aggressive. You've probably in your own life experienced being talked at. It's really uncomfortable. It's very condescending. It's very aggressive. And so maybe you're the person who does that. Notice that in your own life. Where do you do that? And who does that around you? And what can we learn from that? How can we listen more to understand, to truly understand each other? And we can even see this in our global situation, where we're, for the first time in my awareness, having studied history and international politics since the mid-1980s, it's the first time in my awareness that we're in a situation where we have warring parties who are not somehow negotiating behind the scenes. There's no other war that lasts any length of time where people don't also try simultaneously to come to the end of the war. And this is a situation where we're in, where the parties that NATO parties, the West, collective West under NATO, and especially led by the U.S., which is ultimately what NATO is. They're refusing to talk to what they perceive to be their enemy. And this is an aspect of the quality of Gemini that would be the immature expression of communication. This is very destructive, lacking wisdom, refusing to talk, refusing to try and understand, refusing to try and get another viewpoint is extremely immature and very dangerous. Um, so we're again, look in your own experience of life where that might be happening, whether it be in the comment section of social media or whether it be in the connections that you have with siblings. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily engage with people that are not good for you, or that you're not ready to engage with. It's not about that. It's just about understanding. Um, so we're just seeking to improve communications with Gemini. Um, and Mercury represents so many things. It's like this third house, and Gemini and Mercury just encompasses so many things. And one of them is that the notion of just talking without really necessarily saying anything, what we could describe as gossiping. So we can, if we're not using the discernment of Jupiter, the wisdom of the Sagittarius aspect of higher understanding, we're deep into the sort of shallow end of Gemini, into this kind of talking without any purpose, or just talking to say stuff, um, talking to fill the space. And this can be one of the reasons that Gemini is associated with gossiping, for example, or this kind of chit chat, this kind of lightness, like cocktail chatter. Um, and that tendency to disparage and gossip and talk about other people is not going to engender a genuine connection with people. It creates mistrust and suspicion. So there's an old expression that goes something like, great minds think about ideas, average minds think about themselves, and small minds think about other people or talk about other people. So it's thinking and talking in this regard. And so we can also see, where are we on the spectrum of any of that? Where do I spend most of my time thinking and communicating? Am I doing this in a way that builds connection, builds bridges, which is very Gemini, bridges, connections to other places, train lines and bus lines and bridges and airplanes and all those things? Or am I destroying them? Am I ripping them apart? And so there is this kind of interesting barometer that we can understand as, if we really start to reflect on how we communicate with other people. Where am I on the spectrum of that? And a barometer is a measure of air pressure. And of course, Mercury and Gemini represent instruments as well, everything that measures or weighs or assesses. And so there's always this tendency with the Gemini energy to want to understand through locking it into this temporal understanding of how much does it weigh, how big is it useful? And that's very practical day to day, but it's not the whole picture. So we can never really fully understand something if we're only looking to measure that. And this is where modern science has tripped up in a lot of ways, where there's a loss of the philosophy behind it, the underpinning of what it means to be alive or what it means to be human, and the over focus on the little minutia of it. Which is also kind of diffused more and more as we go through modern understanding of science. It's constantly changing. And then, of course, Gemini is also about language. It's not just the words that we say, but it's also how do we express those words? What language are we using? There's body language. Gemini represents body language as well. Nonverbal communication of all kinds, but it's also, of course, the different types of regional dialects or the languages that come from hundreds of different countries around the world. And there's a German word called Schadenfreude, and Schadenfreude means to delight in the discomfort or the suffering of other people. And there's a lot of that. That's the easy, more unfriendly side of Gemini. Gemini representing friends, of course, friendliness. And Schadenfreude is a bit of a trap, can be a bit of an addiction, thinking it feels temporarily like you can feel superior or in a better place compared to somebody else when you see them suffer, but you're not suffering. But the truth is that you ultimately end up suffering if somebody else is suffering. That's that, again, the wisdom of Jupiter says, no, we're all connected. Keep in mind that the mutable signs are ruled both by Mercury and Jupiter. So we've got Mercury ruled Gemini and Virgo, and Jupiter ruled Sagittarius and Pisces. And so there are different levels of understanding, different levels of trying to find where the truth is. There's the relative truth of the Mercury ruled signs, and there's the what you could call the absolute truth of what it means to be alive and what is sustaining all life. Um, and so that anytime you're feeling this sense of, oh, they're suffering, those people are suffering, therefore it's good, or let's make those people suffer, whether that's an individual or an entire country, we have to keep reminding ourselves that that causes ourselves more suffering. We can't escape it because the absolute truth is that we're all interconnected. So this idea of these people are better than another, those people are evil, we are not evil, our friends are not evil, doesn't work like that. Gemini being, again, that Mercury understanding of this is also true, that's also true, there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. There is so much nuance in Gemini, and there's nuance in everyone, in every individual, and in every nation, in every culture. And there's no absolute good or bad. There's no person, certainly no country, that is all good and all bad. And to keep in mind that nuance is part of what we need to understand the whole picture. It's part of what builds the bridges. And otherwise, we get this mistrust and separation and ostracism and blocking people out, canceling people. I don't like your opinion, I will cancel you. Or worse, not only cancel you, I'm going to drag you through the mud. So then where do we all end up? So this is for me a big lesson for what to understand at this Gemini new moon, because we're really at a critical point in our history. We're moving towards a totalitarian mindset, and it's a new brand of totalitarianism. It's no longer a far right totalitarianism, it's actually a leftist totalitarianism, which is a whole new flavor. So it's got this smug, self-righteous quality, this political correctness on steroids, um, that has people afraid to speak, afraid to say what they want to say, whether that means online or in their families or in the just in terms of how they engage with their everyday life. There's this self-censorship, and censorship is all about that dynamic between Gemini and Sagittarius. This is really dangerous stuff. It's really dangerous stuff. This is the stuff of burning books, of re-editing books so that they feel more comfortable, or re-editing films so that that feels more comfortable, uh, rather than learning, rather than feeling we can evolve and feel the resilience of being able to see there was a way of thinking that was wrong or inappropriate, that is no longer appropriate for this moment, but we don't have to blot it out. We still need to learn from it. So ancient Eastern traditions, which are the ones that have taught me the most in my life experience, whether it be through Jainism or Buddhism or Vedanta, they talk about the solution to Schadenfreude, what you could call the antidote. And the antidote, in the Sanskrit, they use the word Maitri. And in the Pali, which was the language of the Buddha, which doesn't exist any longer, but the Pali word is metta. Metta, which means it's not Zuckerberg's Meta, but the METTA, metta, two strong T's there. I don't say them properly, but two T's, not one. And metta or maitri means friendliness. It can often be translated as loving kindness because these words don't have an equivalency. But friendliness, loving kindness, care for each other, this is the antidote to Schadenfreude. Being nice to each other. And then an even more precise antidote to that, which is part of the quadrant, which is called the four immeasurables, which is understanding how we can really practice feeling good and connecting ourselves to others as a spiritual practice. One of the other of the four immeasurables is mudita. And mudita means it's sympathetic joy, or being in delight for the good fortune of another person. It's the exact opposite of Schadenfreude, that requires a friendly attitude to the other person that says, I'm really happy that you're happy. I'm really happy that you've got a great job, even if I don't. I'm really, really happy that you're getting married, even if I don't have a life partner. I'm really, really happy that you're having a baby, even though I've not been able to. And the beauty of practicing this, and it is a practice because our culture again tends, the lowest common denominator tends to lean towards Schadenfreude. The beauty of this practice is understanding how enriching it is for our lives and how it blesses other people, that keeps a circle of joy and upliftment going in our neighborhood, again, Gemini, in our community, in our exchanges with other people. So it's a very beautiful practice. I invite you to try that practice. The practice is literally to hold back when you feel jealous, when you feel wronged, when you feel life is not treating you fairly. Come back to recognize that other person has their own karma. They have their own life. I have mine. I can be happy for them. I don't have to be ecstatic about my life situation as the only way of being happy for another person. I can be in a difficult situation and still be happy for another person. This is what builds greatness. This is what builds connection and love for each other, which is what we need right now. We need to feel this connection to one another, or we will self-destruct. And even if we self-destruct, and this lack of communication between the warring parties who are cruising down the path of more and more war and potential self-annihilation, even if that is the case and we have to deal with that, we will be better off for having come to the end of life in a place of generosity and connection and love for one another, rather than anger and hatred. So this Judeo-Christian idea, or the sin, let's call it, the sin of coveting what your neighbor has, coveting your neighbor's wife in the biblical sense, carries the same understanding. So if you're one of these people with the finding it difficult to take your understanding from foreign cultures, then come back to your own culture and see that it also says the same thing. So the Judeo-Christian culture also talks about this non-covetousness, which means that you understand that what another has is their own good blessing. It's their benefit. It's their good fortune, and that doesn't have to take away from me. And so jealousy and resentment and feeling your nose is out of joint, feeling this Schadenfreude when something goes wrong for somebody, it just doesn't even have a place when you have this understanding. It just doesn't make sense. It's redundant. And it's most especially redundant when you truly understand astrology, when you truly understand the natal chart and each unique configuration, each unique placement in the natal chart is part of a karma of everything that's come before, that is just leading to this lifetime. It's what this lifetime is about, that is unique to the individual. And so wanting what the other person has, comparing yourself, that Gemini tendency to compare, which is deadly, very demoralizing, leads almost directly to resentment and depression. That comparison of another person's life makes no sense if you truly understand astrology. Astrology is showing us how unique your life is, how unique my life is, anybody else's life experience. And then as we go forward in life, we take this start that we get that is a unique imprint in a moment in time, and we make new choices. Another Gemini word. What do I choose? And those new choices in this lifetime lead to the next moment having a particular flavor. So really, really think in this moment of the Gemini new moon, what are the choices that I'm making? Am I communicating in a place of connection, building bridges, um, being brotherly or sisterly in my love for other people, or not? Friendliness, brothers, sisters, friends, all that stuff. This is all Gemini. Maitri, this is the friend. This is the great friend. This is the Buddha to be in the way of looking at the Buddhas, or the 10th incarnation of Vishnu in the Hindu way of looking at it. That incarnation is the friend. It's the Buddha to be, the Maitri, the Buddha to be. It's what is to come is friendliness. My teacher Thich Nhat Hanh used to say that the Buddha of the future is the Sangha, the group of people that come together, the friends that connect and support each other, the community of like-minded souls. This is another way of looking at this capacity to engage in the Gemini from the highest perspective. So I also want to point out this very tight square between this Gemini new moon and Neptune in Pisces. So again, Neptune is now ruled by Jupiter. Because it's in Pisces, it's another way of seeing reality. It's maybe what you could call the absolute reality, the capital T truth. And then of course Gemini ruled by Mercury, which is there. Mercury is in a broad square to Saturn, and Saturn and Jupiter are still in a in a sextile aspect, very supportive aspect here. Which I think contributes to this quality. If we take the highest meaning of Neptune and the supportive meaning of the Jupiter and Saturn sextile, it can be a quality of learning compassion. And then the Jupiter sextiling Saturn is really good for discernment. It's really good for a deep understanding, deeper wisdom, something grounded in faith, because Saturn also is ruled by Jupiter, also in the sense of oneness, in the sense of boundlessness, which is why Saturn is so helpful, in fact, in Pisces, because it actually creates some kind of limitation, where otherwise Pisces just dissipates, dissolves into boundless oneness. But this energy for me is a real opportunity to develop compassion and to really reflect on compassion. Compassion in and of itself is also one of the highest practices in Buddhism. It's understanding. You could say the same about a yogic practice. For example, it would be related to ahimsa, non-harming. Compassion is karuna in Sanskrit, and that understanding of, wow, you're suffering, and I really understand. I really feel that suffering. It's not, oh, I also suffer. Let me tell you about my suffering now that I see your suffering. That this is talking at somebody. This is not empathy or seeing deeply. This is, again, coming back from a selfish place of just talking at, not listening. Compassion is about understanding emotion, which connects you, really understanding. This would be one of the most beautiful ways of understanding this moment in time, and developing that, trying to develop that as a practice, as a way of seeing through what's going on in the world. Of course, there's always another side to this, and that can be that there's deception and disillusionment and disappointment and downright lies, and deception in the sense of both disappointment, but also deception in the sense of being deceived intellectually, or not seeing clearly. This is a challenge with the Neptune square the moon and the sun, not really seeing your way clearly. So let this moment soften into a few days. Anyway, at the time of a new moon, I like to follow the traditional way of waiting to see the actual moon in the sky, the little tiny sliver of a crescent moon. And you wait for that moment to take action. Take the darkness of the moon as a way to come into yourself, interiorize what's going on, try to understand it and process it from that Gemini point of understanding, even if it, in the way of labeling and trying to understand in the ways of measuring and trying to account for things in the Gemini way of understanding, it can be very helpful. But realizing and remembering always that it's not the complete story. But using that in terms of discernment, and this will be helped by the Jupiter and Saturn sextile that's still very, very strong and building as Saturn is going retrograde now. Um, and then this brings me to this understanding of choice, which is another Jupiter, sorry, it's another Gemini word, which I touched on before. This notion of making choices, and we make choices even when we believe that we're not making a choice. Even if we choose to do nothing, that's still a choice. We are forever making choices. This is another way that karma works. Karma is what brought us to this moment, but every single moment creates a new karma. Karma simply means action. Is the word for hand. One way to find the etymology of karma is to see that it's the action of your hands, the result of what your hands are doing, including choices. So our thoughts lead to actions, right? And actions lead to consequences. That's karma. And so with this underpinning of understanding of the bigger picture, what are the result of my choices? What am I choosing in this moment? What do I need to do differently? What do I need to choose differently so that I can come to a better understanding of what I need and also what my life might need overall. Um, and so Gemini, bless its little archetype, is not known for integrity because of that mercurial tendency to change its mind, change its opinion, change its allegiances. It's flitting about here and there. It's this ultimate duality. It doesn't even have a fixed sex or gender or identification with masculine or feminine. It's the ultimate. Um, it's the ultimate hybrid. It's the original hybrid, and so that energy of Gemini, it's not known for integrity, and so this is where Gemini also gets the reputation of being two-faced or being uh, unreliable, being a liar even. And it's not like Saturn ruled Capricorn or the solar type of Leo that is all about integrity, that is really about staying solidly in tune with what is what is my ethos, or what do I believe. So this Mercury in Gemini, this energy of Gemini, sees the grass is greener everywhere except where it's standing. And so there's a tendency to kind of not be stable, but where we stabilize again is in that polarity of Sagittarius, which is about understanding what I believe. What do I believe? And having a firm belief, having a foundation in your faith, or whatever you could describe as what makes you feel you believe something, is really important in terms of stabilizing this kind of chaos of the mind, to center yourself in something bigger than this constant flitting around from idea to idea. Of course, Gemini ruling all these gadgets and things, it also rules our smartphones and these things that keep drawing our attention away, endless screens. Even if we want to go outside and have a walk, you can't avoid signs. Even if they're not billboards that are flickering lights at you, there are signs everywhere, and it constantly draws our attention. And it's very rare to find moments deep in nature. If you have that often, every day, ideally, then you're very fortunate. But don't fall into the Schadenfreude of, aren't I better than all those other people who are who are tormented by urban living or whatever. That again, this is that duality that's unhelpful. Recognize that we are constantly being drawn away from ourselves. We're constantly being drawn away from what is fundamentally life itself. Um, so this is like our our politicians that have been in the news this last week or so with some like Boris Johnson. He's a Gemini stellium with the ninth house Gemini stellium. Uh, he quit as an MP. This is his Saturn return, his second Saturn return, which is he's got a 5-degree Saturn. So look around January, look to see what Boris Johnson is up to once he figures out what to do now, because he's kind of political kryptonite at the moment. And he's known for lying. He was a journalist when I first came to Brussels and I was working in the European institutions. He would write the most incredible trash, the most unbelievable stupidity and outright lies that were printed in the Telegraph as if it were true. Didn't matter, doesn't matter, because Gemini doesn't care. It's just words. And again, I'm not talking about you people who might have strong Gemini qualities. I have Jupiter in Gemini. So it's about the archetype of Gemini. It's the archetype of Gemini that doesn't care about if it's true or not. It sounds good. It's funny. It's entertaining. The other one is, of course, Donald Trump, who is the sort of American version of Boris Johnson. And they really represent these qualities very strongly. Very entertaining, really easy, words strip off the tongue, and super entertaining, incredibly bright minds, but not really stable. It's hard to rely on them. Don't look for any real substance. Again, until they access the Sagittarian qualities. Or Russell Brand is another one, a Gemini. Gemini Sun. I can't remember if he has other stuff in Gemini, but anyway, you see the model. But Russell Brand is trying to access that balancing quality of Gemini, which is the Sagittarius and the Jupiterian way of looking at the big picture. And he still runs off at the mouth and he still jumps to conclusions, but he catches himself now, which is different, and therefore can be teaching higher truths instead of just making words and sharing ideas. And again, there are many more, so you can put them in the comments if you can think of other really strong Gemini types. It's just off the top of my head. These are the ones that I jotted down. And so reflect on these questions of what choices should I make right now? I just also forgot to point out the Mercury that is ruling this new moon is also in a beautiful sextile to Venus. It's at a broad sextile to Saturn. We're going to allow it just because of that Jupiter connection as well. But also this lovely sextile to Venus. Eventually, within a couple of days, it's going to be sextiling Mars as well. It's in a broad sextile to Mars as well. But the sextile between between Mercury and Venus allows for friendly connection. It allows for wonderful, soft, sweet words, creative words, a self-expression. Venus in Leo, self-expression that is harmonious. The Mercury in Gemini, friendly and connecting, and so this is the side of this moon that I'm really trying to emphasize in my own experience, and also trying to point out to everybody else that we do have a choice here. We have to step back. This is the choice, again, big word for Gemini, of recognizing the propaganda and the insidious influence of the very, very deep nature of how we're being controlled by thoughts and ideas and entertainment, and all of it coming with a purpose to control us, but also to divide us. The divide and rule, divide and conquer is the old Roman way, which is so strongly represented today by so many governments, and by what you could describe as the global government, which Pluto in Capricorn has been showing us. over the last 15 years. And so really, really reflect on this. Really take some time to reflect on, what do I believe? What do I think? How do I communicate? And what is that grounded in? And then I wanted to leave you with a little practice. We don't need maybe we don't need the chart right now, so I'll just come back to me here in this little moment of time. And this practice that I wanted to guide you through, which is to understand the connection between breathing, Gemini. Gemini rules the lungs, and of course speech. That's how we can only speak if we have air in our lungs. You can't speak if you've just exhaled fully. That's where you have to kind of slow down, wait, breathe, and then speak, right? All speech is an exhalation. And so we tap into the breathing as a way of understanding where our mind is. So the extent to which you're in a state of peace of mind is going to be reflected in your breathing. And if the breathing is really shallow or really rapid, you're in a state of anxiety, and it's a feedback loop. And so shallow breathing also causes anxiety. It's a feedback loop that perpetuates over a long time. It can cause panic attacks when it's chronic or really acute. And then when we look at, say, breathing through the mouth, people who breathe through the mouth, they actually, again, cause a certain stress. It causes a bodily stress, but it also dulls the mind. And so this connection, again, between the breath and the mind and speech and communication and all these, it's just this constant interchange that is all about Gemini. And so understanding that if we breathe more deeply, and we can breathe in a way that's much more profound, we can, and slow, because of course Mercury in Gemini is anything but slow. So breathe slowly and ground yourself, like that Jupiter in Taurus. Ground yourself, slow down, and breathe more deeply. Thinking of Venus in Leo, breathe through the heart. I used to teach this when I would teach yoga. Having people breathe through the heart. Let's do it now, where we can do this together, just 3 breaths, and practice this embodiment, because Mercury doesn't think about that. It's too much in the mind. It doesn't. It's like a headless chicken just running around. It's not aware of the body. Or Rahu is a great example. All mind, no body. The North Node. So if you come with me now and just sit wherever you are, or even if you're standing, you can do the same standing, ideally sitting or lying down, just to make it easier. And slow down, bring your attention into your feet. I do this at the beginning of every session. So those of you who've already met with me, we've done this together. And feel your feet. What are your feet touching? You can close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. Otherwise, just look down, become calm. And feeling the feet, sense the feet and whatever they're touching. And then sense the base of the body. So whatever you're sitting on or standing on or lying on, feeling yourself grounded into that. And here's an important thing to help you come back to yourself. Bring your awareness to your back. All day long, we're rushing forward. This Gemini energy of going somewhere, doing something, rushing forward. Bring your awareness into your back, literal back, the skin on your back, the spine, the energy behind you. Bring all of your attention there. You might even find yourself recentering when you do that. It's like coming home to yourself. And then becoming aware of the back of the head, the back of the neck. Soften that space at the base of the skull, the place where the neck meets the skull, what we call the occipital ridge. It's a very important part of your anatomy, where we sense fear when we're in a state of panic or stress. That's the first place to tighten up. And that's also tight because of computer neck, when you push your head forward, constantly stretching forward. And then come to the top of the head. Feel the crown of the head. And if you'd like to, you bring your attention to the heart, and you can even bring your hands to your heart. So you either bring your palms together and join the hands with the thumbs resting at the heart, or you just bring your hands to your heart and feel the heart beating. Bring all of your awareness there into the heart. And then as you do that, imagine that your breath starts right there. So rather than breathing through the nose, bring your awareness to the heart and imagine your breath begins right there in the heart. And just take a slow inhalation. Breathe from the heart. Don't ignore the nose. Nose is taking care of itself. Just breathe from the heart. It can even help to sigh. So this is especially good for the liver and the anxiety that you feel when you take a deep breath through the nostrils and then exhale through the mouth. Sighing, this brings you to a place of better groundedness. We know that it affects beneficially the central nervous system, brings you into a parasympathetic nervous response as opposed to the more heightened fight or flight sympathetic nervous response. So breathe in through the nose and then exhale with a sigh. You can make it super dramatic, even like kind of a, this really emotional kind of worldly angst sigh. And just keep letting yourself do that a couple of times. This kind of Scarlett O'Hara thing. Let it all go. Fiddly dee. And then just take your time to come back, coming back to the heart and to the top of the head, and the back of the head and your back and the spine, base of your body and the feet and whatever they're touching. And then open your eyes and your back. And you do that for maybe 3 breaths and come back to clarity of mind and a feeling of being grounded that helps you make choices. It helps you to remember who you are before you make choices. Remember that you're connected to everyone and everything around you, that all life is moving through you. And finally, just to leave you with the image of you breathing in your neighborhood, and think in terms of the inhalation coming from the exhalation of the trees. Everything green is exhaling what you need to inhale. And everything that you're exhaling is what the trees and the greenery around you needs to inhale. And think this is how life is always. It's not some of the time, it's all of the time. So how you treat your mind, how you treat your breath, how you communicate, how you engage in the world around you every day, this is Gemini. And this can be life-sustaining, and the opposite is also true. So I wish you all the best for this next lunar cycle, and I'll see you in the next video.